Welcome back to our Friday, I guess maybe TED Talk, Desk Talk, Office Talk. I don't really know what we're going to call it. We will be coming up with a release for an official name soon, but welcome back. It's myself, Marco Lujic, Michael Ranfone. We have a very special person with us today. So, the whole point of what we're doing is to educate the public, to get people involved in healthcare, to get people involved in preventative care, and to kind of fine tune your lifestyle and intake in terms of nutritional value so that longevity, quality of life are expanded, right? And our whole goal here is to make you healthier and help you find those tools to do it. So it's only natural we bring on someone who's an expert in the food industry because I think we have a lot covered in terms of macronutrient and nutritional value of certain things, but we're a very far away view of it. And somebody who is in Luke's position is deep in the heart of it. So if you don't mind, kind of introduce yourself, let us know a little bit about who you are, where you came from, and maybe your backstory into how you got into what you're doing.
I'd love to. Well, and thanks for having me, Mike.
Yeah.
Mark, appreciate it. So my food, honestly, my trajectory into food service really started from not having any direction after high school. I spent a year traveling. That was mostly terrible, and it scared me enough into doing something with my life.
What was terrible about it?
Terrible about it that I don't mind admitting, I was working at a pizza place, and I met one of the cooks that worked there. Went to Penticton, British Columbia every year during the summer to pick cherries. You start in British Columbia, you pick cherries down the coast, you end up in California. I've been reading Jack Kerouac, stuff like that. I was like, perfect. I'll just flop around and do this, and So he said, okay, great, you're going to meet me at this hostel I go to every year. And I got on a...
This is a horror movie in the making.
Oh, yes. I got on a Greyhound. I packed 2 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I don't know, that was going to last me 3 days. It lasted me about 8 minutes. Seriously, I ate them before we left the station. I was like, well, what do I do for food now? And I spent 3 days without changing my clothes, traveling across country up to British Columbia. I got off the bus there. It was the morning. I walked to the hospital and the hostel, and it was no longer in business.
Oh my God.
And there's no cell phones. There's no local internet.
And that chef's outside with 5 of his friends waiting for me.
And it's a small town on the water. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's beautiful, but there was absolutely nobody around, no payphone. I just sat on the sidewalk trying to think, what am I do? And some guy walked by and he's like, what are you doing? And I said, oh, I'm traveling here. But he goes, I pick cherries every summer. Here's the horror story. He goes, I pick cherries every summer. He goes, you come stay with me and my kids, and then we'll get you set up. And so I went with him to his house. I basically had no other options. And I met his kids. He made dinner. Over the course of a couple days that I was staying there, I got this feeling that he was going to try to take advantage of me in some way.
Yeah.
The first morning I woke up to him watching me sleep.
Oh no.
And that's not a good sign.
Yeah.
So
This is intense.
Yeah. So
we're deep in it already. This is good.
I wasn't really sure what to do. So I kind of played 18.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So I just kind of that day I was like, I'm going to figure out my options. I get a bus ticket or whatever I do.
Yeah.
But I had no place to go. So he was like a stoner. So we got high first thing in the morning. And then he goes, I got to make one stop. And he takes me to a therapy appointment of his. I'm so young and high. Yeah. I go to the therapy appointment. The therapist lets me sit in the appointment with him. And he talks about his childhood trauma.
Oh my God.
His sexual abuse.
Oh my God.
But it wasn't a big deal. I just shrugged it off is what he said. And then I'm like, oh my God. So we end that. I was like, I got to go do something. I run to the bus station. I call my grandmother. My grandmother's like, get out of there. So I do. He meets me at the bus station. He jacks me up against the side of the bus. I need some money. He just wanted money. And I was like, I don't have any money.
Yeah.
And I just got on the bus. And so that was enough to was like, this lifestyle doesn't work for me.
So you never got to pick a cherry?
Never got to pick a cherry. I bought the cherry picking equipment, which I brought back to Connecticut with me.
Full circle. That'll come
Full circle, yes.
10 years later.
Yeah. And now that's what I do.
Yeah.
So it was just one of those okay, you're young and completely stupid and you should do something with your life. So very blue collar by nature. So for me, a trade is good. And food service just kind of seemed like a good match for my personality and energy. So I started the search for culinary school, and I went to the New England Culinary Institute in Vermont, which did not survive the pandemic, so they're closed now. But that was a great experience. And once I graduated there, I had a really excellent experience moving around New England. I lived on Nantucket. I lived in Maine.
Oh, wow.
So it was like a lot of fun, but I really didn't like the food industry lifestyle. It's before I left, a great uncle of mine told me, watch out for drugs and alcohol. It's a really hard industry. And I was like, that's not going to be me. Cut to me. My first day I got my job in Maine at Arrows. That night we partied, and I don't remember that night at all.
Yeah.
So that it's just amazing. Like that is the industry. If you're not careful, you are going to become an alcoholic or a drug user. So like that, I didn't like that. I didn't want that for my life. Working minimum wage, 70 hours a week on your feet. So moving through, I had a passion in culinary school for nutrition. We had classes on that. So while I was working in food service, I moved back home. I decided to go to UConn for exercise science, and I did that full time while working. And at that point, I was doing social work. So I spent about 4 years getting my degree from community college, and then UConn. And then when I finally graduated, that led me to right about the time I moved up here to Hamden and started working with Tough Girl, and then the rest is history in terms of seeing people train, not really eat healthy, not have the resources to eat. And I thought to myself, like at that point, there were really no meal prep. I was not aware of any meal prep places. I thought the idea was mine and mine alone.
Right.
I just happened to be an early adopter of like, what if you make food for people and then you bring it to the gym and they buy it and they go home with it? And that was really kind of the impetus, and started that. Quickly realized that most like young athletes don't have any money, so you have to go to parents, busy professionals, and that. So a lot of it was like finding the right people to purchase, but that was kind of the journey of really loving food service, but not loving the traditional way that it is structured. And it's kind of just an industry without like enough regulation. So if you're like me and you're a control freak, it's like you don't want every day you walk in to be like, what's going to happen? How long is the shift going to be? What, like how many customers are coming in?
Yeah.
And so prepared meals gives you that controlled environment. You know who's ordered, how much you have to make. Then you can really work on controlling your quality and then get it out in a structured time. So that's really the journey for me in terms of combining that experience, the life and education.
Well, it's interesting too, and we'll get into a little bit of how you guys met and maybe how you developed a relationship with him over time.
Yeah.
But the cool thing is, like, in the food industry, the easy take is a high volume, low quality, get it out the door, service as many people as you can.
Yeah.
In the gym industry, that's the box gym. But both of you guys chose essentially to swim against the current, right? Because it would have been very easy to just jump in the gym and be like, you know what, I'm going to just open a restaurant and like serve stuff.
Well, you know what else is high volume, low quality? The hospital.
Medical.
Like we're all, but like that's the funny thing about this. Everything's running parallel.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing, because I think that's something we all have in common, right? My impetus for change was being like, all right, we figured out a way to kind of implement a little more secure leap into the world of medicine for me. But for you guys, it was relatively unknown territory. Like I didn't know it was going to work, but I knew I had the opportunity to like find a physical brick and mortar. I can open an office in the gym. You invested your time, faith, and money into what we were doing. The community did. So it was a leap of faith against the stream, but it was almost like, okay, I kind of have a little bit of an area to jump to. But the two of you really jumped into complete kind of abyss, because you didn't have an email chain to use. You didn't have marketing already in place. So where do you think, I mean, we'll skip ahead a little bit, but where do you think in the food and exercise industry, like the next big thing is, right? So you were ahead of the curve on the catered meal plans. You're way ahead of the curve on the catered exercise plan. What do you think the next phase is, which kind of brings me into the question, where is the best place for food and exercise to intersect? Meaning, at what phase in your life should you be like, all right, very food conscious or very exercise conscious, or both should be combined? And I think any opinion would be one.
Yeah, you want to take a stab at it, or
Sure, yeah,
I definitely have my thoughts.
Yeah, me too. I think the food industry is eventually moving and will have to move towards better raising of livestock, growing of vegetables, all sorts of produce. Mostly because, like, right now, like, poultry prices are high. Why? Well, because there's bird flu, and you can't give birds antibiotics. So
Yeah.
what they do is they kill them, and they don't even kill them humanely. They basically, in the warehouse, they just increase the temperature in the warehouse till they die of heat stroke. So there's an inherent
I
cruelty
didn't know that.
in food service.
I wish
and
I
that
didn't know.
no, and the reason I say it is that's why I'm like, I love food service, but at the same time, like, I hate a lot of the practices because it's built on and if you ever get the chance to read Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, you can go back to the early 1900s, late 1800s, and see that the our food industry is built on terrible practices that to me are like kind of reprehensible in nature. And that just bleeds all the way down to the restaurant.
Yeah.
Everyone's trying to, like, save a penny, save a nickel, and you'll do anything, but it's at the cost of doing anything out of like quality, or just out of, like, your own personal morality. So I think, my personal opinion, I'm a little bit of a nihilist in this way. I think if something's not working, I think it should break, even if it's painful, because it needs to change. So, like, if, during the pandemic, if you see, well, this chain restaurant went out of business, you're like, well, that's too bad. Like, it's not, because their practices weren't good. They should go out of business so that somebody better can come in and replace them, because no one needs to feel bad for TGI Fridays if they're not doing well. They have all the resources in the world.
Yeah.
I think that, like, same thing with the food industry. If it's not working, if prices get too high, it should get to a tipping point where it's no longer viable. So we have to do something else.
Yeah.
Because typically most humans won't change until they're backed into a corner. And I think it's the same way in business. Like, why would the car industry change away from gas if that's the status quo?
Yeah.
Why would they go through it?
They make money on it.
Exactly. So the food industry is the same. I think we need to get to that place where it's not viable at all, and we have to change our practices to something that's healthier. I think the thing that's healthier is to care about our products,
Yeah.
to actually have some compassion in how we raise livestock and grow
Yeah.
produce and all that. And I think that will then bleed down through the industry in terms of, like, thinking about how we make products. Like, not everything needs to have a 9-year shelf life.
Yeah.
And not everything needs to be hyper palatable. But, like, why were people generally leaner, like, in our grandparents or our parents or grandparents' age is not because you didn't have access to food, but you didn't have access to the same hyper palatability and calorie density of food, on top of the fact that a lot of people were generally more active.
Yeah.
If you gave those people the same products that we have now, the same thing would happen. But it's like, we didn't really get canned food until after World War II.
Yeah.
And that became kind of like the big thing. But now you go from, like, well, canned beans to, you could get 2,000 calories easily in a couple snacks if you wanted to. And you wouldn't be able to do that 50 or 60 years ago. So I don't think that people will change. I don't think practices will change that much unless we get backed into a corner. I think we're heading in that direction because things are going so poorly now. We've got price fixing in the poultry industry that's should be punished. It is punishable by law, but nothing happens.
Yeah.
You've got your two big producers. They fix the price. So I just, for me, it's like, I think we need to get back to, like, let's actually care about how we do things. And I think that will actually bleed over.
Well, it's an interesting thing in exercise world. And one second, but I got to just make the statement. Like, the corporate model has presented in terms of public facing that, like, food and medicine should just kind of be your right, which I think gets taken two different ways. One is, well, then you're willing to take a cheaper product because if you get served it in high volume, you're okay with that because, well, I'm getting a lot for my buck.
Yeah.
and healthcare the same way. But that corporate model has now, in the food industry, turned into monopolies.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you look in food, it seems like the same companies own like everything.
Sure.
Then there like 4 or 5
Big
big
players like
companies that
Kroger,
own-
supermarkets,
Yeah.
and then that trickles down to the farming.
Yeah.
like Kraft owns like 37 brands.
Oh, yeah.
And General Mills. And,
Yeah.
Yep.
and then medicine, we're watching it happen too, right? Like in Connecticut, you either have Yale or you have Hartford. Now, general population, you can answer this question pretty easy. Eventually, the CEO of Yale and the CEO of Hartford are going to be like, hey, buddy,
Yeah.
Connecticut's got about a $8 billion market share in medicine. Right now, we're fighting over like $500 million between the two of us. You know how we can really corner the market so that we don't lose anybody in New York? How about we join forces?
Yeah.
Right? Because that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And then as a consumer, you have no choice
Right.
left. And I use the example of supermarkets because just in North Haven, you have a Big Y, you have a Stop and Shop, you have a Time and See, you got like a bunch of options that people like to use all the options. What if you only had one? Right?
Yeah.
That changes the game a lot.
Yeah.
And do not be fooled. The minute that business admin of that single entity knows they got you trapped, you're going to lose.
Of course.
So I think medicine and food are transitioning like that, unfortunately. In the medical end of it, I do believe you're going to have a completely dichotomous system soon. You are going to have government-paid single-payer system here, which will be what we call insurance, and then you'll have private everything. Surgery, all specialties, healthcare, because eventually you're just going to have to pay for the quality.
Sure.
And then in the exercise world, where do you see trajectory in terms of like the next phase? So from semi-private. By the way, meatloaf, if you make it, are you a lot of raisins and onions or like not a lot? Or do you even use raisins and onions?
I've never used raisins in meatloaf.
Really?
Very interesting though. Yeah.
I've never heard raisins.
Yeah.
No?
And I do use onions. You just got to caramelize them really well so you get all the water out so they don't make the meatloaf
How about
watery.
raisins and carrot cake?
Oh, of course.
Lots of
them? Yeah.
All right.
Wasn't
Yeah.
raisins in general like a French thing? Like they used to put it in apple pies,
I'm not
baked goods.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of baked goods, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's just a preservative thing, you know? I mean,
I thought it was sweet, like sugar.
Well, it is, but I'm saying in terms of if you have excess fruit, that making dried fruit is just a way of making your product last longer. So then you try to incorporate it into
so
more and more
shelf life
things.
is more.
Yeah.
Little trick of the trade, we didn't know.
Yeah.
Exercise, where are we heading?
Well, before this got going and Luke was describing basically the economic implications of how the food industry works. And I was sitting here and I'm like, all right, so for the most part, you know, you're very keen on what's going on in the food industry, you medical and exercise. Exercise right now is the only one that's not really governed by anybody except like an independent thing. So I think at some point exercise will be part of some kind of conglomerate situation where like let's just say chains of gyms, there's only 2 owners, but there's still going to be these no different than like little restaurants outside of McDonald's and you know maybe a health clinic outside of Yale or Hartford.
Right.
I think you're just going to start to see more of that because you know private equity firms are getting into the space, they're starting to buy up big chains or people that have distribution, and that's the whole thing. What's the distribution look like? Right? That's what makes food way more profitable. That's what makes medicine way more profitable. How many people can I get under one umbrella?
Yeah.
And it will inevitably happen. I think the way this all is working, though, is so, you know, like food is becoming really a cause of sickness. And now you're going to see more like specialty drugs come out. I mean, I remember when the GLP-1 really hit the scene and they talked about the economic implications, not just in food industry, but all the other industries that it's going to affect because people will have a different lifestyle. That also means that they're not going to be behaving the same way. And economics is nothing more than the study of behavior in terms of spending.
Yeah.
So like, it's just funny to think about you change any one of these things at scale, a lot of downstream effects will occur. I don't know exactly how exercise will play a role because it's so deficient right now. And I think it's like 77% of America doesn't get the daily or weekly recommended amount of exercise, right? But everyone eats every day,
Right.
You know what I mean? So like exercise is behind in that way where it's not as easily controlled or influenced from an industry standard. You know, where medicine is like, hey, this is now illegal.
Yeah.
This is now a narcotic. This is now the standard operating procedure. Food, we just saw it. Dyes are now banned.
Right.
Not really, but that's what that's what they're saying. You know what I mean? So
Right.
like these things can happen from a top-down situation way easier than exercise because it's not regulated by the government per se.
And we were talking a little bit before we were filming, like Luke brought up a good point. Not being athletic does not mean you can't exercise. And for some reason, like the modern culture, I almost see it in the youth area more so in terms of, they don't really like to exercise. They're more of like a theater arts kid.
Yeah.
So I don't understand that statement.
Mm.
Because when I go to theater, in my mind, they're running around, vocalizing,
Performance,
tired, probably exhausted, like that's a physical movement.
Right.
So that doesn't really make sense in parallel. But the other thing is, where does that interest lose itself in like just foundational exercise and movement for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we lose sight of that. And the reason it sparked my thought in terms of going down this little path was the dye thing, right? So dyes in food are a big deal right now. And it's like headlines on the news, we're going to ban dyes. And great. In my mind, the dye should have never been a thing to start with. And the secondary thing is you could have banned them and not told anyone, just been like, hey, we're not going to put shit in your food that kills you.
Right.
Like, you don't have to tell me that you're saving my life when you're not actually saving any part of my life. You're just not taking away from it anymore. Yeah. Right? But do you think the dyes are anything to do with now increasing the quality of the food? Or like, that seems like a pretty small little
you can probably
focus
actually
on.
make the opposite claim that it makes stuff harder and less consistent because there's going to be an alternative to a food dye.
Because
so what's that alternative?
Right.
Like, you can't just have like like bad example, but like if my kid eats Fruit Loops and they're all the same color and they're all white, he's not going to eat Fruit Loops,
right?
Or whatever the hell it is. So they're going to have to replace that dye with something. And I know they use bugs or whatever that for the dye for the color.
Yeah.
But that's harder to source. So economically, those products will be more expensive.
Yeah.
They're going to be less consistent because when you make something in a lab from whatever materials, it's easy to make.
Yeah.
So there's also other like peripheral effects of saying no more dyes. So what is the benefit of not having that dye versus
which is an interesting thing. You can answer this now or later, but you gave me the answer once before and I asked. If I order food from you on a plan from Strong Kitchen, it actually is cheaper for me per gram of macronutrient to buy your pre-made that you packaged, you delivered to me, than if I go buy the stuff myself and make it.
Yeah.
How is that possible? Because I don't think people realize this. And do you think if somebody came to you and said, I want to lose 20 pounds, and they only ate what you gave them, you could accomplish that thing? So those two questions.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is I'll touch on what you said first about eliminating the dyes. I think what will happen often in the food industry, because it is, I will again say, seedy, that you'll see it.
No
just
pun intended.
Yeah, just like with chicken. So chicken, if I look at and you have to be in the know, but if I look at other meal prep companies, and they'll often tout one of the things, and it could be other restaurants too, not just meal prep companies, but they'll tout our chicken is antibiotic free. Like, right, because it's against the law. All chicken is antibiotic free. You're saying something that's inherent. That's like, that's like saying like, well, I didn't, hit my kids this morning before. Like, okay, well, I would assume you probably weren't, right?
I can't say that.
Yeah.
Today was rough.
Right. But it's a marketing tactic for something that all chicken everywhere in the United States is antibiotic free. Yeah. So what I think, knowing that that's how the industry works, unfortunately, what will happen if there's no food dye, there'll be something else. Maybe you use turmeric or what, I don't know, whatever, or a different bug, whatever it'll be marketed that we no longer use as food dye. Now we're using X, which makes it a premium product, and now it costs more. And that's a slippery slope I don't like, is that rather than just being honest, everything becomes a premium product. And we live in a world where coffees are $9 and it's $25 to get a hamburger. and a
it's mind blowing.
yeah, a high fructose corn syrup free soda is $3.75, and you're like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Like, there's no room for honesty in the industry, and so I think RFK Jr.'s heart is in the right place with the dyes.
Yeah.
It's probably more easily actionable to make a law that bans it, because you don't really have to do anything besides ban it.
Yeah.
Versus we're going to go back and rework how we introduce education in our public school, nutrition education in our public schools, or physical fitness. Those are a lot harder
Yeah.
to create a plan for and then implement. So I do fear that banning stuff like dyes is just going to lead to increased prices, because now everything's going to be some sort of premium BS. But I think that's also part of the reason why it's cheaper to like buy from us than it is from the grocery store, is because we get everything wholesale, and then we don't really do anything magic to it. We just turn raw food into cooked food, and we add flavor. Whereas if you go to the grocery store now, yesterday I walked past a stand of Cheerios.
Yeah.
And the box is smaller than ever, and it says large size on it. And I'm like, well, that's just, that's the world
size.
you're stuck in now. Yeah.
There's large family,
right.
whatever, and I look at them and I'm just like,
right.
What did we have 20 years
right.
ago?
So the new family size is what pre-pandemic was just the regular size box of cereal.
And less money.
Less money. And you're like, I don't care what you say, there's no way a box of Cheerios is worth $1.
No, it's fucking wheat or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's not, it's probably worth 3 cents to make.
Exactly. Say what you want about the war in Ukraine, politicize it. People will try to plug in stuff that make it impossible to pick apart.
Yeah.
But you can't tell me, or the average person with a couple brain cells, that it costs you that much money to make Cheerios.
Yeah, no, it doesn't.
You can't.
And the other crazy thing I just learned recently was the margins in the supermarket industry are very low.
Very low.
So clearly it's the middle handling people that get from farm to the supermarket, actually, who's stealing the money in the interim.
Of course.
Which is also in the medical industry. But
it's usually the middleman that really has
there's
the
a
most
whole
leverage.
conversation to be had about that down the road. But
yeah. So, so what is the consumer supposed to do? Like, you have kids, you can't, are you going to say, I don't have kids, but you say, you're never going to eat cereal, you're never going to eat bread, you're never going to eat candy, because we're making a political statement. You probably still got to include some of that stuff sometime.
You have to.
So if we were all just adults, you'd be able to like rationalize, but you can't do that. So we're stuck just being served whatever the grocery store gives us. I think since people vote with their dollars, the only thing you can do is simply choose not to purchase if you can. Like, there are issues I have with Starbucks. I don't like a lot of their like cultural shifts. They're now that coffee's so expensive, I simply don't go there anymore. Yeah. If I'm desperate and I have no option, I will go. But that's just kind of my choice. I think a lot of people are making decisions like that because things are getting so expensive now that you are thinking about how you spend your money a little bit more. But I just think it stinks for the consumer, because it's capitalism, or it should be capitalism, which would mean that there are a lot of choices and the consumer has choices. And that if something isn't actually a viable option, if it's not a good product or it's priced incorrectly, that product or that business goes away and is replaced with somebody else. But when you have like government that's captured by donors from whether it's media companies or food, exactly, or like the drug industry, it's like, how are you supposed to win?
Yeah,
the people who are supposed to be looking out for you are only concerned with lining their pockets. I think that's fairly obvious. And then if you say anything about like the drug or food industry, usually the first finger is like conspiracy theorists.
Yeah.
And so it's like almost impossible to rationalize, which is why I say sometimes like you have to have no other option. Like, maybe we need to have 80% obesity rate before people are like, oh yeah, maybe we should look at how much
there.
Yeah, we're getting there.
Yeah, exactly.
But you have total sellouts in every industry. Like, there's a very prominent online Instagram doctor who initially was a lipidologist, and I'll solve all your problems naturally if you go through this progression. I'll take care of your fats. I'll have you lose weight. You'll feel healthier. Natural. Got a contract with Weight Watchers. Weight Watchers. Weight Watchers thing failed. Now is pushing GLP-1 meds as his primary source of therapy. Now, I am not opposed to them. I think all meds are great when used in the right way. So I don't want to confuse that.
Yeah.
But His entire shift went from natural now to GLP-1s. Now, this is how hard they get doctors to sell out because every doctor is a whore and a prostitute. So for $1, they'll do any trick you want to pay them. And here's how. He now is promoting and supporting Eli Lilly's direct-to-consumer GLP-1 and outwardly shitting on compounding pharmacies that provided an affordable, really, really well done pharmaceutical product to the people that helped a lot.
Yeah.
And here's the problem. They draw this villain of a compounding pharmacy. Meanwhile, did anybody see the pictures from when the North Carolina Pfizer facility got disrupted and it was like rats in the fucking mixers? You know, like, yeah, they don't tell you about that, right? Because Pfizer has a gajillion dollars, can call the local news station, be like, hey, buddy, yeah, this is Johnny from Pfizer. You published that article and like the $8 million ad we signed up for next week, we're not going to run that.
Yeah.
What do you think Johnny at WFSB, North Carolina Woodsy is going to say when that's their entire year's budget in one commercial?
Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of that, like that price gouging, that consumerism, that corporatization, that sales manipulation of the consumer, it's sad. And I always tell everybody who sits in this office with me, who says like, oh, let me go do a little research on that. I say, here's the difference between any other doctor's office in this one. You shouldn't leave here thinking you need to go do research, right? I should develop enough trust that your professional life, you take all of your time to observe that, your kids, your social life, your wife, your friends, whatever you want to do, husband, anything. Pay me to worry about what I should worry about. And trust me enough that when I tell you something's going to harm you, hurt you, or be good for you, you can believe me.
Right.
But that world exists because people have been going to doctors for so many years now, getting spewed nonsense because it's a marketing ploy, because it's driven by pharmaceutical, because it's driven by a volume-based product that the CEOs, admins of these hospitals that have grown 7,000 to 8,000% versus an 11% increase in providers, they have to make the money.
Yeah.
And it's a volume play. And it's a sad state of being. Now you're on the corner, you're on Dixwell Ave. No,
Whitney, yeah.
Do you see any big car accidents in front of your spot?
No, not directly in front of our spot.
Really?
No.
Not at all.
I haven't in a while, no.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Because Whitney, every time a pole gets hit, like you lose power.
Yeah.
Yeah. Every time there's a car accident, I know, and then I go drive down there and it's in the same fucking.
It's I see it a lot of times a little bit further down closer where I live, where there's a corner and people have either hit the stone wall near Hamden High, or they've driven into the front yard of the people across the street multiple times on both sides. Yeah. So, yeah.
Now, do you get, it's an interesting thing in medicine. So I'm a non-insurance based practice. So people come in here and say to me all the time, well, I pay for all this insurance. I'm not going to pay for you. So I always ask like, well, if you pay me, you're going to get something. And I always ask like, what are you actually getting for your health insurance, right?
Yeah.
So in the gym space, it's actually the opposite because they try to go always with the cheaper option. What do you think is like the best way for somebody who's walking into the world, wants to primarily focus on their health? They have the option, big box gym, Ranfone training system style gym. What in their brain would you say to them is like the most important thing to remember to make the choice, like I'm going to commit to this or I'm going to commit to that?
The easiest way, because clearly anyone can have the best intentions. The person that's sitting on the other side probably carries some doubt that you're not just trying to sell them something. And I totally get that. So rather than me trying to convince them that I can do X things, I ask them about the evidence they already have. You've already probably tried to make your own food, but you eat croissants,
right?
Or you know what I mean? Like you've already tried to do the gym thing,
right? You
have 2 memberships to, local facilities that you don't go to. So, or like I could do research. There's WebMD. It's like, yeah, but then what?
Yeah.
You still need someone to do the thing, because you're not a doctor, assuming, right? So I try to point out like the things that have failed you in the past are going to be a recurring theme. So if we don't actually address the fundamental reason why you're not doing it, you're going to have the same result. Like
Yeah.
everything you have right now is a cumulative effect or an accumulation of all the things you've already done. So let's do different things to get different stuff.
Mhm.
You know, and a lot of the time, like we have very competent people come in. They're not dumb. They're high achievers. They've been successful in academics, athletics, business, medicine, whatever, but they haven't been able to crack this nut.
Yeah.
So what we're able to afford or provide them is the ability to execute a plan. Great, you want to know the why behind all this stuff, but let's worry about the what and the how.
Mm.
Do the what. We'll show you how to do it. You'll be guided, supervised, led through this journey. And hopefully you'll get a different result because you're doing different things.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You know, and it's also something to be said, like we're so based in numbers.
Yeah.
You know, like it doesn't matter necessarily how you feel. It's like, what are the numbers showing us?
Yeah, and I think at the original beginning of the conversation, you mentioned something about like exercise not being regulated. And it's an interesting industry because it's almost one of those things where I can't actually understand how it's not a forced agreement.
Mhm.
Like if I'm an insurance company, I wouldn't insure anybody without them having like a key fob and at least entertaining me
Yeah.
by driving to a place that clicked the button. Like at least make my alarm system click that you did it today.
They have
right?
safe driving discounts on your car
this is
insurance.
what I mean, like
yeah.
something. Or if you go 8 years, 10 years without even touching your deductible for an urgent care visit, like maintenance visits, no problem. But like you never ended up in the ED, you never ended up needing like how are you not rewarded for that?
Yeah.
Because the fact that we even need to reward you for that is sad.
Yeah.
But fine, we're there. The fact that you need to pay into a system to keep you healthy that does nothing for you except disaster care is also sad.
Mhm.
And the fact that that system markets direct now pharmaceutical because it's $1 billion industry, meaning that's how many people are sick.
Yeah.
Like the fact that Pfizer or Eli Lilly can spend billions on an ad campaign buying 30-second to minute commercials is a disgusting statement on the health of this country.
Agreed.
Right? That shouldn't even exist.
Yeah.
At all. Like we should have some of the vaccines that are out there I love. We should have vaccinations and then healthy enough people that only the outliers
Mhm.
need a very few people, meaning very few people need help with pharmaceuticals.
Right.
And if you did it the right way like that, with true preventative care from the youth on with good food, good exercise, nutrition, good medicine, on the back end, imagine if hospitalizations in the United States weren't in the millions and they were like, oh, 180,000 people this year needed like flu control.
Yeah.
Because you could actually do that.
Yeah.
Because your upper 3 to 8% of health people in terms of voluntary health right now don't get sick a lot,
Mhm.
right? They just don't. And you tolerate the sickness better.
If I could jump in to touch on what Mike said and what you said, Marco, is one, I think almost whether it's business or government, everything always comes from the top down.
Yeah.
So how can you expect people to trust information that's coming out when we're exposed to so much and so many people they're either grifters, they're misinformed. Yeah, you have people whose heart are in the right place. They just don't know.
Yeah.
Like you have fitness people who are like, this person really passionately cares. They just don't have a lot of education. So sometimes they say some stuff that may not be true, but they're really going to motivate people to get out and move. So you have a whole spectrum. But like if your government isn't honest to you about how it spends its money, what it's doing with your healthcare, like how that impacts you, I think that level of distrust just kind of seeps its way down into the population. And then when you're exposed to so much, like we're overexposed now, but we don't have actually any education, right? Nobody knows, because if we were smarter, people would know how to do math. No one knows how to do math now.
Yeah.
And that's because you have the ability to find the answer on your phone in your pocket. You don't have to think. So we're exposed to so much. So I challenge people all the time with this. When we were at Parker, I did for a couple people that had pushed back on like carbs. And so you'd have somebody like at one point, remember when Bullet Coffee was really, like, well, I eat fat to burn fat. You're like, okay, well, you're fundamentally misunderstanding that you're going to oxidize whatever nutrients you ate primarily, probably except for protein, but you're going to oxidize them for fuel. So eat fat to burn fat, or I have liquid ketones in my coffee. Like, right, you're going to burn those ketones because you just ingested those ketones. Also, I'm just going to go through a couple steps. you're adding butter to your coffee. Okay, pre-workout. Well, okay, well the fat doesn't go into it doesn't pass through your intestinal lumen. It has to go into your lymph tissue.
Yeah.
And then it circulates your lymph tissue, and then it dumps into your heart before your heart pumps it in general circulation.
Right.
Congratulations, that fat hit your bloodstream
An hour
after
and
you
a
went
half
home
later.
and took a
Yeah,
shower.
yeah,
like
yeah.
so like if you follow the steps, people don't even have a logical, they grab a tagline, but there's
Yeah.
no information on like what you're actually doing. Well, I don't eat carbs because of insulin. You're like, do you eat protein? Yeah. Well, insulin. Leucine spikes insulin, right?
Yeah.
How
So
about caffeine?
right, exactly. So it's not insulin. Like, well, I don't eat fruit because of like fructose. And then that's what I always say. How many people do you know got fat from eating fruit?
Yeah.
Oh,
No.
wait.
Yeah, yeah.
How many what's the most apples you've ever eaten sitting?
Yeah. No. Right.
You've seen the
one?
research on apples to diabetes, right?
No, I haven't.
It
Oh,
doesn't
yeah,
exactly-
okay. Got him. But if you apply like the smallest amount of logic to these statements, they completely crumble.
Yeah.
But I think that that's impossible to do for so many people because there's so much information. And as humans, we're always looking for the thing that kind of like affirms what we already believe, or that requires the least action on our part. So people's personalities are just going to gravitate towards a thing that already works for their particular personality. And I think that's why transparency is so important, so that people get to know you as a doctor or you as a coach or a trainer. So they're like, this person is not only willing to talk about things, they're willing to almost give away all the answers.
Right.
And that level of trust building is really important. I think we're going to find in social media now, especially, that if you're not being honest, if you're not like actually talking about what you do and how you do it, that you will fall by the wayside, because there is just too much information and most of it's bad. And Dr. House says all the time, like, how would you expect anybody who's has financial hardship not to eat fast food?
Yeah.
If somebody has to go to the grocery store and they have to take the bus to the grocery store, and then they have to buy the cheapest ingredients they can. Well, eggs used to be cheap.
Yeah.
Now they're not. So what do you expect this person to buy? And then they've got to lug all that back to their house. You're telling me that person's not going to, it doesn't make sense to spend $9 on fast food?
Yeah.
Of course it does.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is like it's like education, but also like you can't blame people for doing the thing that comes easiest to their particular situation
Well,
financially.
we messed up the education on exercise and nutrition so bad
Yeah.
that GLP-1s are a thing.
Yeah.
Like if I said this in the very beginning, between the three of us, if any human walked in here, stood in front of us and said, all right, in the next year, I want to lose 30 pounds, I want to gain a pound of muscle. You guys are in charge of everything I eat, everything I do in terms of exercise and all my medicine. It is a 100% guarantee we can accomplish that.
Right.
If they walk in here with type 2 diabetes, a 100% guarantee we can cure it. You walk in here with almost all forms of hypertension except for very few.
Mm-hmm.
I'll guarantee you by the end of this experiment, it's done. Right? Like it is crazy. And I had this thought earlier, like the sad thing is the information, like you said, is not educational. Sometimes it's just marketing.
Mm-hmm.
Doctors in like the 80s and 90s lost hospitals to lawyers and admins, right? Business people took over because doctors couldn't handle the business.
Right.
Then enough distrust was built in the system that currently, like, Joe Rogan has a louder medical voice than most doctors.
Mm-hmm.
That's all you need to know.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And all that guy does is marketing.
Mm-hmm.
Marketing.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, they're going to ruin the industry too. And I'm already seeing it. Like, I get texts all the time, like, I cold plunge every day, 3 times a day. Then I sit in the sauna. Then I go for a hike. And then I put my feet on the ground and sun my scrotum. Like, who told you to do that? Right? It's not for everybody. It's not to be used in all the time. It's not to be used in every type of human in every situation. It has to be catered to the consumer. But the medical world lost it. The food world lost a lot of credibility. And exercise world, terrible, right? Because they don't know who to trust. And it's funny to me because people always say, like, if hormones cause cancer, I shouldn't take them, false information. Then they're like, well, you exercise too much, you're going to hurt yourself.
Yeah, right.
Like, think about that statement. right? So it is unregulated. It's misinformed. It's uneducated.
Mm-hmm.
What would, I think in closing, like, what would be your biggest like ask of population in terms of, hey, here's why you should do what we're asking of you in terms of exercise nutrition? What do you think the biggest take?
I think a lot of what we talked about is like how people who may not be in full knowledge or understanding or education of these things, like what are they basing their decisions off of?
Mm.
And largely it becomes beliefs, and I think everyone should have their beliefs. But if you have a belief, it's really hard to break that belief because it's part of your identity.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than saying, I believe cold plunges do X, or I believe carnivore diet should do this, it's like, what if instead of saying belief, you said assume?
Yeah.
I assume these things.
Mm-hmm.
Because then it's a lot less, you're not met with as much defense when you're trying to help that person understand the other options out there. And if you say, I assume carnivore was supposed to help me, rather than I believe carnivore is going to help me, you can say, well, has it helped you thus far?
Mm-hmm.
Or what about it? So it's not a personal attack. It's just like now we can get to some objective reality and some common ground, hopefully be like, okay, well, it's helped you lose the initial 5 pounds. And then you can give them a little bit of the science behind it, be like, well, that's because you lost some water weight or,
Mm-hmm.
You minimize your calories and blah, blah, blah. And then you can help them understand why they held that as a belief when it was really just an assumption. And again, like I think a lot of people, especially in starting to see this almost cult-like behavior in fitness and health and food, it's like, this is the right way.
Yeah.
This is, it's like, yeah, but is it working for you?
Yeah.
And what's the cost of it working?
Yeah,
Because
Right.
maybe we can have a better alternative now that you've gotten some momentum or had some success.
Yeah.
Like, don't you want to have this going forever? Don't you want to have birthday cake with your kid at
Right,
one point? And
right.
like, and then it becomes more of a real situation for them to think about long term.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause I used to say this about kids. Kids, like younger kids, are really bad at thinking in abstraction.
Mm-hmm.
I think now with food and exercise, people have a really hard time of figuring out what this is going to look like in a decade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about in food world, if you were to give somebody like one tip, one big lever to pull starting tomorrow, how can they help themselves in terms of consumership? Like they go to a supermarket and what should they be thinking?
I think they should be thinking about their. I think typical one is that typically, I think as humans, we're looking for the most calories for our dollar, especially when like resources are more scarce, money's more, or the dollar's worth less. So that I completely understand. But I try to preach as often as possible of like your total calorie intake is the most important thing for your weight. I'm not going to say muscle mass or fat mass, but just general weight. So if you think about where you're investing your money, what does that food do for you? So like if you're even if you can't specify it, if you're eating like vegetables or fruit, like there's a health benefit, right?
Yeah.
Like a sweet potato, chicken breast. I think people kind of know that there's a health benefit there, yogurt. So it's like rather than thinking about like how many calories per dollar, like what's my food quality per dollar? What's the nutrient density per dollar? Because all of a sudden, the things that you might reach for, typically like really processed foods, suddenly don't hold any value if you apply that sort of logic to it of like, this is just like mouth pleasure. It doesn't do anything else for me. Now, some people struggle with that because they're emotional eaters. But if you're actually trying to make a change, apply your dollar towards the food quality and nutrient value, and you won't be able to justify a lot of the choices, except you just want to have birthday for your kid or something.
Which is cool too.
Which is cool. And I'm grateful for that because I used to be really didactic because I grew up as a fat kid, and then I had an extreme, I just starved myself down when I was in high school. And for years, I wouldn't touch anything I thought was junk food. My mom would make me a birthday cake, and I just would not eat on my own birthday. And it was Eric Cressy who posted something, be like, eat healthy, but don't be the asshole that has a salad on your birthday. And I was like, yeah, I'm that person. There's got to be a middle ground of like choosing good foods, but also having the ability to work in and just enjoy life.
That's an interesting life experience, though, being in the food industry.
Yeah.
So I think, in terms of topics touched, all of these can be expanded on. There's a lot more to talk about, clearly, in all of these worlds. I hope everybody enjoyed, Luke's contribution to this conversation. Once again, if you do have questions, concerns, please reach out to us on Instagram. Between Mike, myself, we're easy to find. if you have questions, concerns, you want to contribute, or anything you might think is important that we should talk about, or that that maybe could help educate us even more, because we are all learning as we go. Nobody's got it figured out, because what I tell everyone is if the healthcare system were perfect, we'd all live forever. And so far, nobody has beaten death.
Yeah.
Right? We will all die one day. We have not figured out how to solve that problem. Until we do, anyone who tells you they have the answers lying.
Yeah.
So enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon. Adios.